The engine was still cooling when I heard the sound of high heels hammering the asphalt. My sister-in-law was approaching my golden coupe, with her eyes fixed on the gleaming hood, her expression twisted into a mask of pure envy, her words sliced through the morning air like sharp blades. He should have bought it for me. The resentment in her tone was unmistakable, laced with a bitterness I had never noticed before. Right there, at that moment, standing before the car that represented years of dreams and sacrifices, I realized that the tension I had thought was just a minor family strain had become an open battle. The forced smile she tried to keep quickly crumbled, replaced by a look that scanned me from head to toe, calculating, measuring, judging. It was as if every inch of the shimmering paintwork was a personal insult, every detail of the flawless interior a direct affront to her. I felt the weight of that look, the silent pressure of an unspoken accusation. How dare I have something she wanted? Marina, I tried to say, keeping my voice calm. It's just a car. But the words sounded hollow. Even to me, it wasn't just a car. It was the embodiment of 40 years of hard work, of sleepless nights building a business from scratch, of sacrifices she would never know or understand. It was the tangible symbol of an independence I had achieved with my own hands, without depending on anyone. She laughed, a dry, bitter sound that echoed down the quiet street. Just a car. $500,000, Vera. $500,000 that could have been invested in more important things. Her words carried an implicit criticism, a suggestion that my priorities were wrong, that I was selfish for fulfilling a personal dream. That was when I understood the real nature of the conflict. It wasn't about the car. It was about power, control, and the perception that my happiness somehow diminished hers. It was about a woman who had grown up believing she deserved everything without ever working for it, confronted by the reality of someone who had built her own path. Neighbors began to come out of their houses, drawn by the growing argument. I felt the weight of their curious eyes, their mouths whispering hasty judgments. There I was, a 60-year-old woman, being publicly confronted by my 30-year-old sister-in-law, as if I were a child being scolded by a responsible adult. 40 years earlier, when I was just 20, I didn't dream of luxury cars. I simply dreamed of surviving. My daughter had been born when I was barely more than a teenager, and her father had disappeared the moment he learned I was pregnant. I remember holding that tiny baby in my arms, feeling an overwhelming fear mixed with fierce determination. I didn't know how it would happen, but I knew I would do everything to give her a better life than the one I'd had. I started selling homemade sweets door to door, carrying my daughter in an improvised stroller. People looked at me with pity, some with disdain. Single mother, poor thing, I heard whispered, but I turned that pity into fuel. Every no I got pushed me to knock on the next door with more determination. The years passed in a blur of early mornings at work, diapers changed between orders, and dreams woven together thread by thread. When my daughter was 5, I managed to rent a small space to open a bakery. It was tiny, barely enough for an oven and a fridge, but it was mine. I remember painting the walls with my own hands while she slept, imagining what it would be like when the business grew. And it did grow, slowly, with each well-made cake, each satisfied customer who recommended me to others. I worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. My daughter practically grew up in the bakery, doing her homework among sacks of sugar and cake pans. She never complained, never asked why other children had mothers who came home at 6 in the evening. When she turned 18 and received a scholarship to university, I cried with pride and exhaustion. I had made it. She would have the opportunities I never had, the future I had only dreamed about. I kept expanding the business, opening branches, reinvesting every cent I earned back into the company. It was at university that she met Robert, a young man from a traditional family who seemed genuinely in love with her. I liked him. I saw in him the kindness and stability my daughter deserved. When they married 3 years later, I felt complete. My little girl had found her happiness, and I could finally think about myself. Robert was always respectful to me, grateful for what I had given his wife. But Marina, his younger sister, was different. From the first meeting, I sensed a subtle arrogance in her, a way of looking at me that suggested I wasn't up to her family's standards. She had grown up with a silver spoon, used to getting everything without question, without knowing the value of earned things. When Robert and my daughter moved to a house near mine, Marina started visiting often. At first I thought it was to strengthen family bonds. Gradually, however, I realized her visits always had a purpose: to see what I had, comment on my choices, make suggestions about how I should spend my money. Aunt Vera, she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes, "Don't you think this house is too big for one person? You could sell it, buy something smaller, and use the money to help Robert and my sister with their new home." It was always the same: suggestions disguised as concern, subtle attempts to influence my financial decisions. I'd smile and change the subject, but I began to understand that Marina saw me not as an elder to respect, but as a resource to exploit. She had never worked a day in her life, supported by her parents, until she married a man who conveniently could also keep her in the lifestyle she was accustomed to. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The tension between us grew when I decided, at 58, that it was time to fulfill some personal dreams. I had worked tirelessly for 4 decades, built a respected business empire, and finally felt entitled to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The car was just the first item on a long list of postponed dreams. Marina couldn't hide her irritation whenever she saw me doing something for myself. When I renovated my house, she questioned whether it was necessary to spend so much. When I started traveling, she suggested I was being irresponsible. Every decision I made that didn't benefit her directly was seen as poor judgment. What I didn't know was that, behind all this veiled criticism, Marina was facing serious financial trouble. She had racked up credit card debt buying expensive clothes and accessories to maintain an image her household budget couldn't sustain. Robert, ever protective, was covering her debts without question, but the situation was becoming unsustainable. It was my own daughter who told me during a private conversation one Sunday afternoon, "Mom, Robert is working 2 jobs to pay off Marina's debts. She spends like she's a millionaire, but they can barely pay the basic bills." The worry in her voice broke my heart. My good, hard-working son-in-law was sacrificing himself to support the whims of a woman who had never learned the value of money. "Why doesn't he talk to her about it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "You know Marina, Mom. She makes a scene, cries, says he doesn't love her if he doesn't give her what she wants. And Robert, he's too soft-hearted." That's when I realized Marina didn't just see me as a target for criticism. She saw me as a potential solution to her financial problems. If she could convince me to help the family with my resources, she could keep living the way she wanted without facing reality. For months, she stepped up her visits and comments, always in that same tone of feigned concern. "Aunt Vera, wouldn't it be better to invest that money in the children's education? Or imagine how happy Robert would be if you helped him pay off the house." Each attempt was more direct than the last. I politely resisted, always keeping my manners, but inside, a silent indignation was growing. I had fought all my life to build my financial independence, to never depend on anyone again, or ask for favors. The idea that someone felt entitled to decide how I should use the results of my own work deeply outraged me. Asterisk. 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 That day, standing by the golden car while Marina openly expressed her resentment, I felt it was the moment of truth. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep smiling politely at her veiled criticism. "Marina," I said, keeping my voice steady but calm, "this car represents 40 years of hard work. Every cent I spent on it was earned with my own sweat." She laughed mockingly. "40 years of work for what? To impress the neighbors with a car you'll barely use. Meanwhile, Robert is killing himself working 2 jobs." The mention of my son-in-law made me see red. "Robert works 2 jobs by his own choice, Marina. He chooses to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford." Her face flushed with anger. "How dare you? You don't know our situation." "I know it better than you think," I replied, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I know about your debts, your irresponsible spending, and especially your expectation that I should solve your financial problems." That's when she showed her true face. The mask of politeness fell completely, revealing the person she really was beneath all that fake family concern. "You're selfish," she shouted, "not caring about the neighbors watching. A woman your age spending $500,000 on a car while the family struggles. You should be ashamed." I felt tears burn my eyes, but not from sadness, pure indignation. 40 years of sacrifice reduced to selfishness by someone who had never lifted a finger to earn anything. Ashamed, I repeated slowly, should be those who live off the work of others, who think they have the right to judge how other people spend the money they've earned honestly. Marina stepped toward me, her face twisted in rage. You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see others happy. That's why my daughter left home so early, to escape a controlling mother like you. The mention of my daughter was the last straw. Something inside me broke, a barrier I had built to keep family peace, shattered by her cruel, unjust words. That's when I decided to tell her something I had discovered a few months earlier, something I had hoped I'd never have to use. Marina, I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt, before you go on about character and responsibility, maybe you should explain to Robert about the $20,000 you spent on online gambling last month. The silence that followed was deafening. Her face drained of all color, her eyes widened in pure panic. It was the expression of someone who had just seen their deepest secret dragged into the daylight. Asterisk. 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 The discovery had happened by accident. I was helping Robert organize some tax documents when I found bank statements that didn't make sense, strange transactions, large amounts sent to websites I didn't recognize. My business experience had taught me to investigate anomalies, and what I found shocked me. Marina had developed an online gambling addiction. It had started small, just a few dollars here and there, but quickly escalated to absurd amounts. She was using credit cards in both her and Robert's names, transferring money from personal accounts, and had even taken out loans using their house as collateral. The worst part was Robert knew nothing. She had managed to hide her addiction with alarming skill, manipulating bank statements, intercepting mail, lying about purchases that never happened. He believed he was working 2 jobs to support their lifestyle, when in reality, he was funding a destructive habit. I had found out 3 months earlier, but kept it to myself, hoping Marina would have the decency to confess and seek help. Instead, she ramped up her attempts to get me to help the family, probably planning to use any money she got from me to keep gambling. Now, faced with her explosion of anger and unjust accusations, I couldn't stay silent. How did you? She stammered, clearly panicking. How did I find out? I finished for her. I've been in business 40 years, Marina. I recognize suspicious financial patterns when I see them. The question is, does Robert know he's working himself to the bone to fund your gambling habit? Her expression shifted from panic to something close to despair. She looked around, realizing our argument had drawn a small crowd of curious neighbors. The public humiliation she had tried to inflict on me was turning back on her. You can't tell him, she whispered, all her earlier arrogance replaced by pleading. Please, it will destroy our marriage. Your gambling addiction is what will destroy your marriage, Marina, not me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. I'll stop gambling, I promise. Just don't tell Robert. I can go to therapy, I can get help. It was fascinating to see how quickly her stance shifted. Minutes earlier, I was a selfish old woman who should be ashamed of spending my own money on myself. Now I was her only hope of keeping her secret from her husband. And what about your debts? I asked coldly. The loans you took out using his house as collateral. She went even paler. You know about that too. I know about everything, Marina. Every lie, every manipulation, every cent you stole from my son-in-law's trust. Asterisk. Asterisk. That's when I realized the onlookers weren't just curious neighbors. Robert had come home from work and was standing near his house, watching with a confused, concerned expression. He had heard at least part of our conversation, especially the parts about gambling and loans. Marina followed my gaze and saw her husband approaching. The panic in her eyes deepened, but it was too late. The secrets she had guarded so carefully were being exposed in front of an audience, and there was no going back. Marina, Robert called, confused. What are you two talking about? If you've read this far into a story that portrays the complexity of family relationships and the inner strength we find in our most challenging moments, you might want to read others like it. Each story carries valuable lessons about resilience, dignity, and the transformative power of truth. Marina looked desperately from me to her husband, clearly trying to come up with an explanation that would soften the damage. But I had already decided I would no longer be complicit in her lies. Robert, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm, I think you and Marina need to have a very serious talk about your finances. He came closer, worry etched on his face. What kind of talk? Marina tried to intercept. Robert, darling, it's nothing, just a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I cut in. Marina has developed a serious online gambling problem. She has spent tens of thousands of dollars on bets, taken out loans without your knowledge, and has been lying to you for months about the real source of your debts. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Robert looked from his wife to me, trying to process. Slowly the pieces began to click into place. The constant overtime, the bills that never seemed to shrink. Marina's strange behavior. Is this true? He asked her, his voice barely above a whisper. Marina tried to deny it, but her words came out rushed, contradictory, and obviously false. With every attempt to explain, Robert seemed more convinced of my truth. You lied to me, he said at last, pain clear in his voice. All these months, I've been working 2 jobs thinking I was helping our family, and you were throwing our money away. Marina's mask finally shattered. Unable to keep up the act, she broke into dramatic tears, trying to win her husband's sympathy. I have a problem, Robert. I need help, not judgment. You had months to ask for help, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. Instead, you chose to manipulate, lie, and try to convince me to fund your lies. Robert looked at me with a mix of gratitude and shame. Vera, I'm sorry, I had no idea. I know you didn't, dear. And that's exactly why I decided to speak up. You deserve to know the truth about what's happening in your own home. Asterisk. 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 The confrontation on the street ended with Robert leading Marina home, both in tense silence. The neighbors slowly dispersed, whispering about the drama they had just witnessed. I stood beside my golden car, feeling a complex mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved to have finally exposed the truth. On the other, I felt a deep sadness that it had been necessary to break the family peace in this way. But deep down, I knew I had done the right thing. Robert had the right to know the reality of his situation, and Marina needed to face the consequences of her actions. In the days that followed, I got calls from both Robert and my daughter. Robert to thank me for opening his eyes to something that was destroying his financial and emotional well-being, and my daughter to congratulate me for having the courage to tell the truth, even knowing it would cause family turbulence. Marina, for her part, tried to reach me several times. She left tearful messages on my phone, apologizing and promising change. But her apologies always came with attempts to justify her actions, downplay the seriousness of her mistakes, and find ways to shift part of the blame onto others. I didn't answer her messages. I had learned, over 40 years in business, that some people only change when they face the real consequences of their actions. As long as someone is willing to soften their mistakes or offer them an easy way out, they have no reason to truly change. Robert, showing a strength I didn't know he had, gave his wife an ultimatum: immediate professional treatment for her gambling addiction, or separation. No middle ground, no more excuses. It was the first time I saw him set firm boundaries, and I felt proud of the brave man he was becoming. Asterisk. Asterisk. 3 months later, Marina finally sought professional help. Robert kept his word. He paid for her treatment but made it clear that any relapse would end the marriage. They sold their house to pay off the debts, moved into a smaller apartment, and Marina started working for the first time in her adult life. I went on living my life as usual, driving my golden car whenever I wanted, traveling to places I had always dreamed of, investing in experiences that brought me joy. I had learned a valuable lesson about the power of setting boundaries and defending my choices. The car, which had been the spark that ignited the whole conflict, became for me a symbol of something far greater than luxury or status. It was a tangible reminder that I had the right to enjoy the fruits of my labor, that I didn't need permission to be happy, and that my happiness didn't need to be sacrificed to accommodate other people's insecurities or addictions. Through it all, I also learned the difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness would be refusing to help someone truly in need. Self-respect is refusing to be manipulated by someone who wants to use your resources to sustain destructive behavior. Marina and I never became close again. The wounds were too deep, the trust too broken to